Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. This is episode 45 of Truth Sentinel. We cover things like political corruption, cover-ups, conspiracies, mysteries, world events, paranormal and more. We've talked about things like MH370, missing planes, celebrity deaths, honour killings, end times, the police state and a lot more. Check out some of our episodes on YouTube. Look for Truth Sentinel or find us at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. Recent guests have been L.A. Marzulli, Brian Forster, Sean Stone, Gareth Icke, Sheila Zielinski, Douglas Dietrich, Sarah Bajak and lots of others. We broadcast on the move, sometimes relating our location to the show's topics. So we've been to places like Ukraine, Israel, Egypt, Thailand and other places. Currently in Ukraine at the moment. So settle back and listen to today's episode. We're going to be talking about some diverse topics, including the occult, psychics and voting. I'm going to check in with Anthony K first, who's based in Turkey. He's in Cappadocia, in the shadow of the Erciyes volcano. And then we're going to talk to Seth Davis from Two Real News later. And some other people will be joining us later on in the show. So thanks very much for listening. Let's go and speak to Anthony. Anthony, how's things going?
Pretty well, Scott. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. No complaints. Today we're going to talk about a number of topics, but I think you were going to mention an article that you'd come across.
Yeah. I've been having, a flip through the news, as is my habit. And, I'm just, quite intrigued to see vampires cropping up in the news this week. There has been a find in the northwest of Poland. Not the first find of this kind in Poland, but another one to add to the list. And basically, what the find is human remains, several centuries old, but with some very interesting features. So this particular skeleton has a brick stuffed into its mouth, and it's pierced in one thigh. And these sites have been found before in Poland. They often call them deviant burials. So this kind of deviant burial, it's believed, shows that the people who buried this person believed the person to be a vampire. So the brick has been put into the mouth, either to break the teeth possibly, or to make the person starve. And the hole in the pelvis shows that this person has been staked to the ground, and it's thought that that the villagers staked them to the ground so that they wouldn't be able to rise out of their grave. Like I said, this is part of a long list of finds in Poland, similar finds. There was one particularly significant one where there were about half a dozen sets of human remains found in a cemetery in a small Polish town. People of all different ages, a 40-year-old woman, a young girl, a guy in his 20s. And it's thought that these people had cholera, and the symptoms that they exhibited looked to the townspeople like the first stages of vampirism. So they thought, wow, we'd better do something. When these people die, they're going to rise, right? So then the people died of cholera, and then they did all of these, they carried out these deviant burials. There's one really dramatic image from that town of a person who has a scythe across their neck. So the blade of a scythe has been rested on the dead person's neck so that when they rise, they'll cut their own head off.
Nice.
Yeah. So really interesting in terms of, belief in vampirism and where it came from. There does seem to be a link to, it's thought to be cholera, but it could be actually a number of diseases where people who, before there was a scientific understanding of the symptoms of those diseases and what they really meant, these people who became ill were thought to be exhibiting some kind of supernatural problem. So yeah, really interesting story. I encourage listeners to follow it up.
And aren't you going to be heading over to a region of Poland soon, where vampires are thought to exist?
I am. I'm going to be in Poland in a few weeks, and if I have time, I think I'll pop up and have a look. These places, the remains are not on public display, but we might be able to do something about that. And certainly the cemeteries where these bodies were found are all, open to the public. So yeah, it could be an interesting one to look into in a bit more detail.
Definitely, I'd like to look into vampires and also the connection with David Icke talks about bloodlines and royalty, and I know that in a recent documentary, Prince Charles went over to visit Vlad the Impaler's home in Romania, because he's actually closely descended from him, and so I'd like to look at that connection as well.
Well, that really puts the lie to the idea of vampires being glamorous, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know. It depends. A lot of people think the royal family are quite glamorous with all their change of clothes every day and trying to wear all the latest fashions.
I would certainly hope that there's nobody out there who thinks Prince Charles is glamorous. If there is, then I suggest they raise their standards a little.
Yeah, indeed.
But on a completely different note, Scott, I've got a test that I want to give you. I would like you to be my test subject, if you're okay with that.
That's fine by me. I'm quite used to being tested.
Okay, good. Basically, this is a very simple test. I just want you to tell me. I'm going to read you some statements about yourself, and I want you to tell me how accurate they are. Completely accurate, more or less accurate, partly accurate, not accurate at all. Okay?
Okay, sure.
All right. So first of all, you're a person prone to bouts of self-examination.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
Okay. But this is in sharp contrast to a striking ability you've developed to appear very socially engaged, even the life of the party. But in a way, that only convinces others. You're all too aware that sometimes that's a facade.
I wouldn't say I'm the life and soul of the party, to be honest, no.
Okay. But you often find that you're at a gathering, yeah, and on the one hand, you'll be very talkative and funny. On the other hand, you will find yourself becoming detached to the point where you're kind of watching everything going on around you and feeling unable to really engage. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sometimes.
And sometimes you'll play conversations back to yourself in your head, and you wonder what that person really meant when he said such and such. Conversations that other people wouldn't really think about too much.
Yeah, maybe. I can be quite analytical.
Okay. So, if we think about how you've learned to deal with...
Anthony went on to ask me many more probing questions. I knew what he was up to. He was trying to delve deep into my psyche, trying to unlock the secrets that lay hidden there. I wasn't about to let that happen live on air. No way. I decided to answer his questions, make him think I was telling him the truth, when really I was just telling him what he wanted to hear. I was exposing him, opening up his vulnerabilities, making him think someone was playing the game he had set before them. But no, I wasn't. I started to feel excitement at the fact that he was oblivious to what was going on, believing I was really answering his questions. And I took morbid pleasure in this and began to realize this could be a regular thing. I could do this all the time.
But because you're resourceful and you're talented enough to be pretty successful when you really put your mind to something, this kind of encourages you to procrastinate and put things off.
Yeah, I'd say that's true.
Okay. And equally, you've given up on some dreams a little too easily when your mind just flitted elsewhere.
Yeah, short attention span.
Okay. All right. Conclusion. It's very interesting doing your reading, as you do present something of a conundrum, which won't surprise you, I'm sure. You're certainly bright, but you're unusually open to life's possibilities, which is something not normally found among achieving people. I'd say you would probably do well to be less self-absorbed, because it tends to distance you a little, and perhaps to relinquish some of the control that you exercise when you present that stylized version of yourself to others. You could let people in a little more, but I'm aware there's a darkness that you feel you should hide.
Wait, how did Anthony know about the darkness? I thought I hadn't revealed anything to him, but he knew. I vowed never to do this again. How did you know all this about me, Anthony?
People will give high accuracy ratings to descriptions of their personality if you tell them that these descriptions are tailored specifically for them. But in fact, these descriptions are not for them. They're vague and general enough to apply to a wide range of people. And the Barnum effect or Forer effect can provide a partial explanation for some people's beliefs and practices. Belief, for example, in psychics, right? And also for for the success of things like personality tests that you find online. So this is something that Derren Brown wrote to test out that effect. And I think we saw there when we did the experiment that it works quite well. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's like you were looking into my soul.
This is something which this is one of the arts of being a cold reader. So a person who claims to have psychic powers and to be able to meet another individual for the first time and tell them something about themselves. So one of the skills being a psychic is being able to offer these Barnum statements, which seem very specific but actually apply to most people. And I will say right now, as far as I'm aware, I have no psychic powers at all, and I read that from a website, and it was not written by me.
Don't put yourself down, Anthony. I think you've got a talent there. But anyway, we're going to listen to a clip of Derren Brown talking about that very topic right now. So this is a chat between Derren Brown and Richard Dawkins on psychics and people who claim to have psychic abilities.
Derren, could you begin by telling me what cold reading is and how it's used?
From psychics to spiritualists to palm readers to graphologists to astrologists, the expert in question is either just simply deluded and naive, or they're using a skill called cold reading, which is a way of communicating information to somebody where it sounds like they know everything about you and they can reveal facts seemingly about your life and describe your character in a way that you'd be amazed by. Whereas in fact it's a linguistic trick, or a set of linguistic tricks, where they're saying words and you're constantly supplying the meaning yourself, but it can be very convincing. And those tricks can give the impression that the person knows everything about your character, or might refer to facts and things from your life or from your past that they seemingly couldn't know.
The first psychic, a so-called psychic, a trickster, was trying to pretend to guess, I don't know, the name of the sitter's grandfather or something like that. What would be the kind of thing they might do?
Even guessing the name of a grandfather, if you back up, what tends to happen is that the psychic will, if it's with a group of people, throw out a name and say, I'm getting the name John or Albert, or some name that's sort of suitable for the age group they're working with. Now, that name could refer to a person in the audience who's living, or it could refer to someone that's died, or it could be a friend of the, it really could be anything. So it's up to somebody to pick up on it and turn it into what they want it to be. And of course, if they say, yes, that was my husband, then the reader can go, yes, that's right, he's here, he's saying he still loves you.
So how do we know someone who claims to have psychic abilities really does have them? And don't get me wrong, here at Truth Sentinel we are open-minded towards paranormal events, towards psychic abilities even, but at the same time we think people who don't really have psychic abilities should be called out. Anthony, you've been looking into psychics, I believe.
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a background story to tell you about.
I believe you were going to talk about James Randi and his $1 million test. I was watching a documentary recently about him. It was quite interesting. He was talking about Uri Geller, about his bending spoons. Many people may be familiar with Uri Geller, and I think it was in the 80s or the 90s. It was on TV and bending a lot of spoons and stuff. Not that it's a really very useful trick, I always thought, but he sort of went out to expose him and lots of other people and offered $1 million to anyone who could prove that they had any psychic abilities under sort of scientific laboratory conditions. And I don't believe anyone's passed that test. What were you going to say about James Randi?
Yeah, I basically wanted to say what you just said. Last year we talked about Psychic Sally on the show. She was the British TV psychic who was outed at one of her shows, and her entourage reacted to that quite violently because they took any challenge as any challenge to justify her techniques as a threat. She was shown to be using underhanded techniques to get information about people and then presenting it as though she had divined that information by using her psychic powers. But as a very belated follow-up to that, I thought we might talk a little bit about James Randi. He's a very interesting character, and some of our listeners no doubt will have heard of him. He started his career as a stage magician and an escape artist. And he became a bit of a celebrity for this. He was on Johnny Carson and a bunch of other shows in the US quite regularly. But at a certain point, he gave it all up because he'd kind of become disillusioned, if you'll forgive the pun, because he'd seen so many charlatans, misusing all of these stage tricks to try and fleece people. So basically, he then became a career skeptic, and he went around debunking a lot of frauds and charlatans. And the Uri Geller one was a particularly big one. He followed Uri around for a long time, and they had quite a public fight about this.
He appeared on a program with him, I believe, and Uri Geller was really quite tense, and he said that no, he wasn't feeling the power that day, and because they were trying to do a show together, and he really put Uri on the spot, and Uri Geller said he'd sapped all the power out of him.
It's a very difficult thing to refute. I mean, how do you measure objectively whether or not somebody's psychic powers are at a peak on a particular day? But it's a really nice get out of jail card for Uri. But I mean, James Randi followed him around for a long time and was able to reproduce all of Uri Geller's results over and over again. So he fairly conclusively debunked Uri Geller, and along with a very large number of other people, he took down one or two faith healers who were dishonestly claiming to be getting information from God about the people who were in their tents when they gave their faith healing ministries. But as you said, he put up $1 million prize. It was a $1,000 prize initially, and he got a donation, or I think a bequeathment, and he was able to put that up to $1 million. And that $1 million has been sitting there waiting to be claimed since 1996. Nobody has been able to do it. Lots of people have tried. And it seems to me, I may be wrong, but it seems to me that he does give them a fair trial, if we can put it that way. So it's an interesting insight, I think, into how difficult it is to find people with genuine psychic powers which they can demonstrate on demand.
Let's see what Seth thinks about psychic powers. Seth Davis is from Two Real News and often joins us on our shows. Seth, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing all right, Scott. Just staying busy here, and it's a complete pleasure to join you and your audience today.
Thanks, Seth. You're always welcome. Seth, do you have any psychic powers? And if so, would you be up for the $1 million test?
No, and I'm not one of those people that would decide to deceive people with anything and tell them I did. And I think the faith healer guys are among some of the most disgusting people out there in terms of just manipulating people's emotions, manipulating people's beliefs to get something out of it. But then again, are they truly any worse in the end than the politician that cries for change?
The ones that are doing it blatantly, I mean, the ones that are really, being callous. One of them I saw, they were taking details from people before the show for something else. This information was being fed to the psychic during the show, so it looked as though he was being psychic. I mean, those kind of people are terrible. But I mean, I did see one guy that took up the $1 million challenge, and I don't think he was actually really evil or bad. I think he'd self-deluded himself. He was under a delusion that he had these psychic abilities, and he actually ended up crying when it was shown that he didn't have these abilities. What do you think, Anthony?
I think that's a far more interesting case. I mean, the garden variety charlatan is not that interesting because they're just lying to get money. But the person who genuinely believes that they are psychic is a very interesting person. And I think there are a lot of people just out there in the community who have that belief to a certain extent. I've heard many people say to me, oh, I'm a little bit psychic. And I think if that belief goes to a certain level, then it does become either a miracle or a delusion. So those people are extremely interesting.
I'm open-minded towards psychic abilities. I think there's a lot about the human mind and the power of the human mind that we don't know. But maybe because of these charlatans, I'm a little bit more skeptical when people say they have psychic abilities. Plus, there are a lot of deluded people out there who actually genuinely believe they are psychic. But I've got a feeling they're not. I just think you just need to, like we did our show on logical fallacies, and you have to apply logic to things that you do and believe. Although I'm kind of sometimes against scientific principles, or it may seem like it, you do have to apply science a little to what you're doing. and I'm finding I'm trying to do that to some of the things that I believe as well.
Well, I was going to say it'd be pretty interesting to see some of the other topics out there that aren't quite so clean cut, like people with their whatever lucid dreaming or the deja vu thing of people living something in a dream or seeing something like that. People have their visions or whatever. That's something that's a lot more interesting because of the fact that you can't measure that. So I would always say that there are certain things out there, even when we're covering logical fallacies and logical reasoning and logical thinking and everything, for us to remember that not necessarily everything in life is logical, and also not everything can be tested empirically. There are quite a few things that we hold to be truths, that we hold to be realities, that we technically cannot test empirically, at least not right now. Aspects of reality that are not quite so physical in nature.
That's absolutely true. There's plenty of human experience that can't be empirically tested. That's absolutely right.
I believe, Seth, you were you had something to say about a slightly related topic, I suppose, in some way, the occult.
The occult does kind of tie into a certain degree because there are certain charlatans even within the occult, like there is anything. Like there would be, because as we've talked before, the occult oftentimes is simply just hidden religious knowledge there or whatever, or one man's cult is another man's mainstream religion. But there are quite a few people, if you'll have palmists or face readers and all that type of stuff among occultists, at least back to a certain degree of like the 16s and 1700s, you'd see a lot more of that quite often. But in the modern day context, you'd find a little bit more, I don't know, disturbing individuals out there. But there are some people who are much more along the lines of mysticism and the approach of, as I believe we've discussed before, a much more intellectual approach to a lot of this stuff. And then there are some people like an individual we're going to talk about by the name of Aleister Crowley, who, while I'm sure there are a lot of the things said about him are hype, he is the self-titled wickedest man in the world there, I think. What do you know about Aleister Crowley there, Scott, and just the occult in general?
The occult in general, I grew up in a kind of Christian family, and I was always warned about the occult, so I suppose I associate Ouija boards with the occult and some other stuff, ritual practices and pentagrams, and I probably don't know enough about it. I haven't studied the occult in great depth, but I did watch a documentary on Aleister Crowley, and I did find him a very interesting guy, and I've got mixed opinions on him. I thought, if he could have applied himself to something else, he would have probably been successful in a different way, because he seemed to have that mentality of total immersion in his beliefs and really following something to the bitter end. And so I have a little bit of respect for him, and I agree with you. I imagine some of it's been hyped, but he did, if you're going to call yourself the great beast 666 Satan or whatever he called himself, then you're going to get some of that flack. But, some of the stuff I heard about a desert ritual he did with another guy who was left traumatized, and one of his wives apparently went mad.
Talking everything from violent homosexual rituals and everything like that in a forced nature. We're talking pederasty. We're talking bestiality. Quite a few disturbing things, because this is the originator of sex magic. And technically, many of these principles existed prior to Crowley. It's just he's one of the ones to try and mainstreamize them. I believe Anthony used the term, is the Salvador Dali, or more in the modern context, the Marilyn Manson of his day.
Some of the things that he did specifically to shock people. That doesn't necessarily excuse them. I mean, Marilyn Manson, dressing as a fashion store mannequin doesn't hurt anyone except for Marilyn. Some of the things that Crowley did really did cross the line. But I think that following up on what you said, Seth, a lot of occultists would tend to agree. A lot of occultists look on the more kind of dark showman-like aspect of Crowley and LaVey and others with a bit of distaste, because it does kind of give them a bad rap,
There are many people that feel as though the Crowleys, the LaVeys, all those people just play that up 100% and do more to damage occultism to these individuals, such as the guys of Henry Spencer Lewis with the American mystical or ancient mystical order of the Rosy Cross, or the American Rosicrucian.
Yeah. I think I have a lot more sympathy for LaVey than for Crowley, because if you look into LaVey's background, he had a background in theatre, and he loved Hammer horror and things like this, and he was trying to kind of incorporate a little bit of drama of that into his I suppose his private life, and I suppose his ritual his spiritual life, to try to intensify the experience. Whereas Crowley, I think was as I said, it was very much about the shock, and I do think that he crossed some lines, though he's not without his wisdom. It's this phrase, "Do what thou wilt," which by itself seems a fairly horrible thing, but the full phrase is "Do what thou wilt and shall harm none," and even the most innocent Wiccan has taken that phrase on board, I think, or many Wiccans have, and Wiccans are mostly, kind of nature people. They're not into forced sodomy or bestiality or any of that stuff. They're all about, trees and the spirits of rocks and stuff like that. Do what thou wilt and shall harm none is not a bad motto.
Yeah, but it seemed to me that Aleister Crowley's version of do what thou wilt was basically do anything, try anything, have sex with animals, do these rituals, try to open the gates of hell. And that, he was involved in rituals where he was trying to do stuff like that. And, he did one famous ritual in Loch Ness in Scotland, and the one he did in the desert as well. I mean, that's do what they wilt, as in try anything, the sickest thing you can possibly
But I would say, Scott, even the greatest of fools occasionally have at least their own nugget of wisdom there. Hitler quotes that are actually, wow, that's pretty inspiring. Wonder who said that. Adolf Hitler.
It's always a worry when you think that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Isaac Newton is a great example of that. I mean, complete nutcase, extremely unpleasant to be around, but we probably should still keep the laws of gravity.
Yeah, exactly.
Seth, can you tell us a little bit about Aleister Crowley?
Okay, well, we've got born in Warwickshire, England in 1879 by the name Edward Alexander Crowley. Aleister was raised by evangelical Christian parents, taught much of his early life in Christian boarding school, a fairly normal boy until the death of his father at age 11, stirring up some skeptical feelings as to the nature of Christianity. And over the next 8 years, he developed his interest in the occult fairly slowly until his first, quote, mystical experience, which in his case, literal words, literally is a euphemism for his first homosexual encounter at age 19. This started Crowley's obsession with not only mysticism and magic, but also sex, trying to figure out how to combine elements into what he would eventually term as sex magic. Crowley is also, just to put this out there, bisexual at this point as well there, because he did a lot of stuff. At 23, he was introduced to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn by the famous British chemist George Cecil Jones. After making quite a few connections, Aleister started feuding with other Golden Dawn members such as W.B. Yeats and the group's leader, Samuel Liddell McGregor Mathers. Crowley was actually expelled from the Golden Dawn because of his blatantly promiscuous homosexual behavior that embarrassed and offended the other members. He then started his own occult religion, Thelema, with its own fraternal orders of the Ordo Templi Orientis, or the Order of Oriental Templars, the Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, the Mysteria Mystica Maxima, and A Triad, which were eventually picked up and run with by all sorts of figures in counterculture and the occult. Aleister Crowley died on December 1st, 1947, at the age of 72 of chronic bronchitis/pleurisy, and was succeeded by at least 6 children. I would also add that he had a drug addiction later on in life as well.
When you listen to his biography like that, it seems to me that if Aleister Crowley had written a novel, it would have turned out like Dan Brown. It just... all of the cliches of the secret societies and all that sort of stuff, all kind of distilled into one fairly silly person.
But at the same time, a very interesting person. Listen to Freeman Fly chatting to Alex Jones about Aleister Crowley's connection to the Bush family.
Now, Pauline Pierce was friends with Aleister Crowley, and she is known to have gone off to France and had a ritual with Aleister Crowley. So Pauline Pierce and Aleister Crowley off doing... Now, what you must realize is once you get up in the higher levels of Freemasonry with like the Ordo Templi Orientis, the order of the OTO, this is sex ritual, is sex magic, and that's where you get all of these hermaphroditic sexual symbols. Pauline Pierce then has a sexual ritual with Aleister Crowley. She comes back and lo and behold, she's pregnant. Now, whether or not she was pregnant through Marvin or through Aleister Crowley is not known by the public, but then what we find is she gives birth to Barbara. Barbara Pierce then marries the head of the CIA, George H.W. Bush, and we have...
And you've tracked this. This is a fact.
This is, well, as much as we can prove Hitler's a Rothschild, I can prove W is the grandson of the beast.
Well, that's even the mainline history books that that his father's mother did work in the Rothschild house, and that he did have a bunch of illegitimate children and did place her.
And it was mainstream media when Pauline Pierce went to France with Aleister Crowley and had a sexual ritual.
And so, then she is connected to Barbara.
Yes. Yeah. Pauline Pierce is Barbara Bush's mother.
That is a fact.
Yes, absolutely.
That's unbelievable.
And you look at the picture, and Barbara Bush looks very much like Aleister Crowley, and that would make George W. Bush the grandson of the beast. 666, and that's what Aleister Crowley called himself. I look at the picture, I look at the news, I see it. It's up to you to decide.
But to be clear, they admit that Barbara Bush's mother did have a tryst with Aleister Crowley.
Absolutely.
See, I told you he was an interesting person. Talking of interesting people, I just wanted to bring in another guest here, Walter from the Brainfeed website, which you can find on YouTube as well, brainfeed.ca. And I just wanted to ask him what he thought about the occult in general and if he knew anything about Aleister Crowley. Walter, are you there?
How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. It's nice to speak to you again. Walter was on one of our past Truth Sentinel shows about the conspiracy theories. It's nice to have you back. Have you got anything you would like to add about? I know you were listening in on about Aleister Crowley and the occult. Do you have any personal views about that at all?
I've watched a few documentaries about Crowley, so I have like a little, limited knowledge on it. And I've heard others speak about him. I've downloaded his books, I just haven't read them yet. But I am into rock and metal culture, and there's a lot of occult symbology and information used in that culture. So I have been, I guess, exposed to quite a bit of occult ideas and information throughout my path of awakening.
I listen to a little bit of metal, but not that much. There have been one or two scandals in the metal community, especially in Norway, with the black metal community who were embroiled in murder and other stuff. But that got a lot of negative publicity for metal. But it seems to me that for every Burzum or Darkthrone or whatever who are actually going to go out and kill each other, there's a 1,000 metal bands who are just interested in the imagery and the mysticism and so on. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, always have those certain people that take, let's say, Aleister Crowley or Anton LaVey say, some people take these words too far, too serious, and end up hurting someone. But for the most part, I find that a lot of the heavy metal or death metal is a lot, like you said, about shock rock, like Marilyn Manson style. A lot of it has to do with just imagery. As with mysticism or magic, it's all about the mindset and putting their audience and themselves into a mindset that you're entering a new atmosphere that the artist has created.
Definitely. Well, I'd say the streak of occultism also has become to a certain degree. They're just running through hip hop right now. Of even well, technically you could even call it rap. They're the mainstream, whatever the stuff they have on the radio there with the Drakes and the Jay-Z's and Lil Waynes and all this stuff that is absolutely chock full of symbolism. Most of which I'm sure, with the exception of perhaps Jay-Z, that any of these guys, even to a remote degree, understand what they're doing or what they're putting up or the significance of any of this in terms of occult symbolism, whereas Jay-Z likes to style himself as a Mason and all this type of stuff, when indeed I'm sure when it comes to most of these people are much in the same boat as many of the guys in metal music. Most of them don't even really know that much of what they're getting into.
It's not that they don't really believe what they're saying, but I mean, if we talk about the Nordic strains of metal, for me they're probably the most interesting. Most of them are about attempts to reconnect with some cultural roots, with some spiritual roots, things like this. So some of them, as you said, Seth, they have no idea what they're talking about. And on the very extreme end, very few of them are going to take this into a very dark realm. They're actually start hurting people. But I think the bulk of them who are in the middle are trying to explore some kind of spiritual, mystical thing using the medium of music. And I don't see that as a bad thing. What do you think, Walter?
I can tell when if you watch certain videos from certain bands, they use a lot of different symbology. They're not just throwing up a pentagram or the all-seeing eye. They've got a lot of little nuances and symbols that they put throughout and little ideas, occultic, mystic ideas. And you could tell that these people have read into certain books and have certain occultic knowledge. But for the most part, they're fans don't have a clue about the type of hidden ideas and understandings wrapped into their music and their videos. But many of these artists do take this stuff seriously.
I can't remember which band member, maybe someone else will know who I'm talking about. There was a sort of death metal or heavy metal band member.
No, Scorpions. Guitar player from the Scorpions.
Yeah, he said that he went to a party where there was kind of like, it was like a snuff party where they someone had paid for someone to get killed live for them to view. And did you hear about that, Seth?
Yeah, actually, I heard about that, and I was like, what? And then I had to go around and kind of check that out to get a confirmation on it, and it was creepy. At the same time, this is something that we've all known has been going on. This is literally just the dark part of the Hollywood music, dark part of just the industry that nobody wants to talk about. It exists. This is the human element, man, and it's corruption.
Last episode of Truth Sentinel, we were talking about logical fallacies, and one of them was the slippery slope. And if you smoke marijuana, you could end up taking coke or heroin. But what about the occult? If you get involved in the occult in some of the milder versions like Wicca, or you start, drawing pentagrams or listening to music that talks about and uses the symbology, is there any danger? It could end up in a darker place, like, watching snuff films or...
If anything, so-called white Wiccans are a little bit moralistic. They tend to tell off anybody who goes over to the dark side. I don't think they're most of them are in any danger of going there themselves, because they are very protective about it and concerned about, about the kind of ethical dimension of what they do. So I think for the vast majority, no, it's not really a danger. And I also want to say, very often the occult comes up in connection with conspiracy theories, and I think this is a completely different field. Last year, Scott, you interviewed Douglas Dietrich, who has some very intense theories about Satanism in the US Army, with Michael Aquino. And I'm not in any way casting doubt on what Douglas says about this, but I think that's in quite a separate realm. It goes back, I think, to a lot of the stuff that happened, post-Vietnam, where you had the what was it called, the New World Army Manual, and the US Army were getting more heavily into psyops and that kind of thing, and they brought some very sketchy people on board,
like Michael Aquino. And also some very nutty people on board. But that thing, that whole phenomenon of occultism in the US Army and in the Wehrmacht and the Nazi regime, for that matter, that's quite a separate phenomenon to what we're talking about, which is the average person. I mean, are we talking about that? If we're going to talk about it, say if we were talking about Christians, we would talk about people who follow it seriously to the letter, all the practices, and to a really deep level. Isn't that what we're talking about? When we talk about Aleister Crowley, we're talking about someone who's taken it to a very serious level. He's not playing around.
Most people, the vast majority of people in any mainstream religion, aren't going around hacking people up or whatever, but
yeah, there are people who take it to another level.
I think there's a little bit of a fallacy there too. This actually, the new atheists, the anti-theists, fall into this trap quite often. They say, if you're not doing the most extreme version of your religion, then you're not serious. I don't think that Crowley having sex with animals means that he's more serious about the occult than somebody who doesn't have sex with animals.
He was certainly more serious about do what thou wilt. He was following that more to the letter, and it did seem like he would walk into, say, a modern day Wicca group and try to get them to take it to another level. Anyway, I'm sorry we've run out of time on that topic and we need to move on to the next one. On Truth Sentinel, we talk a lot about governments and mistrust of governments, and a lot of political topics and debates and discussions around those topics. We haven't really talked about voting and whether people should vote, although we probably have touched on it. But today we're going to welcome someone to the show who is one of the co-founders from areyouforthepeople.org. His name is Bill, and Bill's going to tell us a little bit about his site and why he thinks people should vote. I'll say something about my personal opinions. Generally, I mistrust the government quite a lot, and I've got quite a negative view of them, and I don't tend to vote. But I'm not against anyone who feels that people should vote and wants to promote that. It's just my personal choice that I don't really see the point at the moment. I'm probably veering a bit more towards anarchy at the moment. Talking of anarchy, let's listen to Stefan Molyneux and his views on voting to add some contrast to what we're going to talk about in a moment.
I wanted to speak to you just soul to soul, so to speak, to hopefully get you out of this mad delusion and self-abuse called voting. And the reason is that, I'm going to tell you, you don't want to vote because of the facts. The facts are that voting means nothing. It's worse than meaning nothing. It encourages participation in a coercive and destructive system. It gives sanction to evil. People have been voting for a smaller government for decades. Reagan is still called a fiscal conservative, though federal spending increased 2/3 under his rule. The federal government has grown by leaps and bounds under the Democrats. Bill Clinton kept the bombing going in Serbia and Iraq. So you don't vote because you think that voting will set you free or restrain government in any kind of way, because you're not an idiot. I mean, I'm going to speak to you as an intelligent, aware, brilliant human being. So I'm not going to give you facts, because facts would be insulting to you. Facts would be to indicate that you were unable to process the basic reality of the world that you live in and the historical evidence of the futility of trying to restrain an agency of violence like the state by begging for crumbs from the table or favors. So you know that the government is fundamentally coercive. It is a coercive institution. That's what it does. That's all it is. And you know that voting is a pitiful plea. It is a beg. Please, master, give me back a little bit of what you have stolen. And I'm not going to insult you by pretending that that is an argument that is anything other than an emotional panic and a fear of increased predation and a begging for favors. The reality of the state is that they'll take whatever they want from you because they have the guns and the jails and the military. And really, the presidency, I mean, come on, people. You don't have to be brain surgeons. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know emotionally. You don't have to be brain surgeons to understand that changing the president changes nothing about the system. It's like you're trading in an old Lada for a BMW and all you get is the old Lada back with a BMW hood ornament on the top, and they say, hey, we upgraded you. You're changing the hood ornament on the car. It's nothing. It's a ridiculous illusion. What are your choices? Cranky old fascist versus creepy hands in your pocket socialist? These are your choices, and you're going to participate in this? Have some pride, for God's sakes.
Strong views there from Stefan Molyneux, and probably closer to my own. But it's good to get alternative views and to hear what other people have got to say. So we're going to invite Bill to talk, and then we're going to make some comments afterwards. So Bill, welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me on the show. It's been a long time. I've heard you since the very beginning.
Great. It's nice to know people are sticking with us. And Bill, so you set up your own site. Can you tell us about it?
The site is areyouforthepeople.org, and the idea behind the site is to put questions in front of all candidates to give us an idea of their thoughts on different liberty and honor related kind of questions. We want to reach all candidates so that they all have an opportunity to answer either yes or no. And we're doing this because the information sources like the mainstream news, the newspapers, that type of thing, don't provide value anymore. It's all just the entertainment type of crap and things that are the news of the day that are very salient to one particular little situation somewhere. Like in the United States right now, we have 2 convicts that escaped in New York, and it is the top of the news everywhere. What should be the top of the news everywhere is the Trans-Pacific Partnership agreements that the U.S. is trying to push through that will threaten our sovereignty and put the ability to take things to court in offshore courts run by secret organizations that even our own politicians are not allowed to find out about. So what we want to do is put questions in front of the candidates to get an idea of what they really think and take that information back, aggregate it, and use it as a way to figure out what these people really will do later on, and hopefully to hold them to this later on as well. There are 3 sets of questions. They are legal, economic, and food and health type of questions, and we think they're pretty straightforward, and it's pretty difficult not to come up with a yes or a no answer to these questions. So that's the basic idea behind the site. We fully understand that a lot of candidates are not going to want to answer the questions. will stall, have delay, all that kind of stuff. We get that. That's actually okay. The most important thing is that we get the question physically in front of the person, the candidate, to choose whether to answer yes or no, and a non-response for us is a no, and we count as such. And they will know that, and they'll have the opportunity to answer the question, and if they want to, they can actually place some more information in with either a verbal response or even a video response, because we understand that some of the questions, there are some things that might go one way or the other for different people in different areas, different reasons, that kind of thing, and we get that. So they'll have the ability to actually come through and choose whether they, want to add additional information into this set of answers as well. We just started this, and we're looking for help for people throughout the United States to help push these questions. We will help them do so, and we have some tools to help them through this process. The people who are helping us to go after the candidates will have electronic tools, mobile applications that allow them to record their responses, even take short video clips of their responses, and get their yes or no answers directly on the mobile device. We even will let them sign the response if they want to as well. In fact, that's one of the ways we're going to validate that the people actually who are answering the questions really are the candidates. So this is just mostly a tool to kind of give us a picture across the board of what people think, one way or the other, take that information and hopefully come back and use that different ways to nudge them as far as what they promised to do to start with, for real. Kind of the idea of this thing.
One thing I sometimes wonder is the populations who vote in the first place. Like, if you think about some of the promises that Obama made on paper and listening to his speeches, they're all great things. I mean, when I first heard Barack Obama, I was actually quite impressed. I thought he was promising a lot, change you can believe in. And a lot of candidates promise an awful lot, and they'll always say they're going to do certain things. And I just wonder whether it seems afterwards people don't even recognize that they're lying, because, Obama and people like Hillary Clinton, I can quite easily see Hillary Clinton being voted back into power, and yet she's got a track record of lying, and it just seems like the population, maybe it's because of media control, I don't know, but people just seem oblivious to the lies as well.
Yep, I agree, and I fully think it's part of the media issue. I heard the Obama speeches too, and I did not get out of that concrete things that were going to be good that he was going to do. We will do great things for you. Everything will be perfect and rosary, all that. And there was nothing really concrete in there other than strange things like we need to have a parallel United States military, that kind of stuff that still to this day has not been questioned by the press at all. We do not any longer have the ability to have the media actually question them and find out what they really believe. It just doesn't happen at all.
Let's check in with Seth. Seth's over in Washington. Seth, what do you think about what Bill's talking about here?
I think in theory it should be able to work wonders there, because it's about getting people reinvigorated, keeping people informed, and actually having individuals going out and contributing to a system or to improving a system by actually expressing their views and voting how they feel something should go. However, I would say we'll perhaps talk about this a little bit later, that it has as being a human element there of corruption, every bit as much of a chance to be railroaded as anything else. However, compared to what it is right now, at very least this is a step in the right direction, and what people need to do is give up the mainstream media, give up the just sickeningly large amount of platitudes, and as we've discussed here on Truth Sentinel before, logical fallacies that are rampant in many of these political speeches, and quite a few of these candidates, and the bills that they push through are absolutely draconian, but most people, just because they're led like lambs to the slaughter there by the mainstream media and by a lot of these large establishments that just don't question anything, I'd say that there needs to be a change, and this is where it starts.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think what Bill's doing is great. But Bill, I would like to ask you a question. Like, if for someone like Hillary Clinton, and she's saying that she's going to stand up for the rights of the common people, and there's going to be a fair amount of people who are actually going to vote for her because they believe her. I just wonder what you think about why you think people believe these candidates when they only have to check into these people and they can see that quite probably they're just lying.
I think you just said it right there in the last sentence. I think that there are two groups of people, ones who check into things and ones who do not. The ones who do not, as well as the ones who do, span all generations. It's not like it's a particular generation that does or does not. It tends to be the older folks that question things more, but they all do. And the ones who don't see anything see a little clip on TV. There are 15 seconds of this or that, of Hillary being wonderful and being supported by all these different organizations, and thinks she's the one to go with. It does not take too much effort at all to dig into that just a little bit to find a whole trail of things that are terrible, and it's almost laughable that this person's running for election.
I suppose I've kind of given up on the system itself, and I think you tackle that on your website somewhere.
I have a specific Scott button at the bottom left-hand side of the website.
I remember you said that. Is that on the bottom left where it says, "But I don't vote"?
That's the one. That's a Scott button. It just gives the reasoning for actually voting. Right now, your choice is to vote or to do nothing, or even worse, to vote or stand in groups and protest and get overrun by police vehicles and that kind of thing. In the U.S., the protest stuff has no impact. It really doesn't. So right now we have no real choice of anything else. So for those who are actually interested in voting, this is a tool. For those who are not, click the Scott button, because at least it'll give you an idea of what happens when you don't vote. When you don't vote, then the people who do vote control everything. And the laws that will be passed by those who do vote will still require you to pay taxes, will still require you to take vaccines, will still require you to provide all your savings deposits to the banks during the next bail-in, and so on. So, it's either let a small group decide everything for everybody else, who will then be controlled for real, or vote the idiots out.
Anthony, what did you think about what Bill said and his site and the topic we were talking about, voting? Do you tend to vote, or what's your opinion on voting?
So I think, in many cases, getting out the vote can have a hugely significant effect. However, I would say we've got a problem in English-speaking countries, because we've had politicians like Tony Blair in the UK and Bill Clinton in the US, John Howard in Australia, whose mission has been to try to reduce the differences between the major parties. And so now you have far less of a choice than you used to about what direction your country will take. You're not voting for the country to go off in a different direction if you disapprove of the direction it's currently going in. You're just not, in the English-speaking world. And that's a big problem. I think in the English-speaking world, what we should be pushing for is referenda, like they have in Switzerland. So on any issue which is felt to be crucial to the public, it's put to the public, and the public can vote on it. That's democracy. Without that, you get to cast one vote every 4 years for a party that's 90% the same as the one who's currently in government. So in that respect, I'm on your side.
Well, I'd like to say that I agree with what you're saying. My thought on that, though, is that there really is no difference to the parties. You're saying that as well.
It's been said before that in the US it's called the business party, and the Republicans and Democrats are arms of it, So I think that may discourage people from voting. Perhaps I'm wrong about that, because, as I said, we've got a quite different system in Australia. We have to vote or we get fined. A lot of people don't see the distinction, and so they don't leave their house. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think the position on having national referendums for things is excellent. That works well in some of our states that use that kind of process, like California. And I think they should do that far more as well. In fact, you kind of spurred me on to think more about that, see if there's something we can't work in to push for that as well. I agree with you on that.
It has been used in Australia on the very rare occasion. It is a time when the people ask, what do you want to do? And the people said, we want to fight this battle. And so the government did what the people asked the government to do. And I think that can only be a healthy thing.
No, I was just going to say what you'd see there as far as the two major parties, an importance of voting there would also be of changing that, of voting for lesser parties, voting for something that's actually different, even if it's not necessarily a direction everyone else agrees with. We're talking about what you believe in, what you agree with, what you are trying to push, the sort of change you want to see in government and in your country. And that's what I think is so important with this, is that everybody, for some reason, tries to create a monolithic vote there. I've people, even with the libertarian thing, say, oh, we need to not vote for the Libertarian Party. Let's vote for like the Tea Party Republicans, like Rand Paul or whatever, because then he has a chance. He's got a chance if he does this. And it's kind of disgusting to see, because it's people that feel that their individual votes have no power, only in a giant monolithic block that they create with millions of other people does it have any effect. And I think that's an absolutely asinine idea.
Indeed, and I hate to say it, but I'm afraid we're out of time for today. But I wanted to thank you, Bill, for coming on and talking to us. And can you just remind us where people can find your site and read about the questions that you would ask?
Yes, I want to thank you too, Scott, Seth, and Anthony as well. I appreciate your comments, and you're going to send me away with some things to think about here as a result of this. Our site is areyouforthepeople.org, and there is the questions page on there that you want to head to first, but there's also a join us section on there if you want to help us push these out to candidates, and a bunch of other things like mailing lists and forums as well.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for coming on, and we'll chat to you again soon.
Thank you a lot, Scott.
That's probably the most convincing pro-voting argument I've ever heard. So I'm going to be going away with a lot of stuff to think about as well. Thanks for that.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it very much.
You have a great one.
You too.
Bye-bye. Okay, I've said goodbye to everyone, so it's just me and you now. Thanks for listening for today's show of Truth Sentinel. Remember, you can find us at www.truthsentinel.co.uk, or you can find us on YouTube. Just type in Truth Sentinel with Scott. We've got 2 channels, and you'll find 45 episodes there now. So go and check them out. And also let us know what you think about the topics we've talked about today, about voting. Do you think people should go out and vote? I'm still of the opinion it's fairly futile myself, but I appreciate that that Bill and others have different ideas, and I still think that it's good work that they're doing. But let us know what you think. If you go to www.truthsentinel.co.uk, you can leave a voicemail for us, which we can put on the show. So thanks again for listening. We really appreciate you taking the time. Catch you later. Goodbye.